God, life is full of happy coincidences. Good to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Rose, great to see you. 1 minute you're on the screen, and next week you're here. Thanks for a great show last week. Well, Friends of Europe, we love our jingles. So thank you very much. Time to begin. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, speakers, members of our Ukraine Initiative Steering Group, many of whom are present today. Thank you for being with us. And of course, you, the audience, here in the room, a full house, and also online. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jamie Shea. I'm the Senior Fellow here at Friends of Europe for Peace, Security and Defence. Senior is a reference to my age, not to my status, but nonetheless, I've been asked to be the moderator for this session of our Ukraine Security Forum. This is the session which is the open public one of our Ukraine Security Forum today. The Ukraine Security Forum is one of the key events this year in our Ukraine initiative. What is the Friends of Europe Ukraine Initiative all about? It's to raise awareness of the importance of Ukraine for Europe's security. Their cause is our cause. That this is not just the right thing to do to support Ukraine, but that it is in our core security interests as well. So we aim to mobilize political and public support here in Europe and beyond in the transatlantic community for helping Ukraine to resist Russian attacks and occupation. And finally, we hope that we can help through this initiative to foster the integration of Ukraine into the Euro-Atlantic structures, NATO and the EU, that we can provide along the way, because to use a phrase of my boss, former boss Jaap de Hoop Schäfer, who is a member of the steering group, it can be a long and winding road, but that we can provide useful advice and expertise along the way to enhance Ukraine's resilience, its social cohesion, its strategic communications, and its good governance. Now, the event today, and that's why you're here, is devoted to the launch of our special new study, which is entitled Ukraine, the Cost of Inaction. It's a study written by Paul Ames. Some of you may remember him as the correspondent in Brussels of AP a few years back. He will be on the screen, I hope, in just a moment as the author of the study to present the main findings. And the idea of this report, again, is to show that helping Ukraine is not an expensive exercise in charity, that the costs of Ukraine losing this struggle will be, for not just for Ukraine, but for all of us, much higher than the admittedly high costs of helping Ukraine to win. And that investment in the event of a Ukrainian success will be repaid 100 times over in terms of what Ukraine can contribute to Europe. But of course, if Ukraine loses, most of our investment will be lost. So what is the real choice? But I hope that you will all help yourself, avail yourselves of a copy of the study. Copies are available at the back of the room. Of course, it will be online as well. So what we are going to do is listen first of all to Paul, and then I will bring onto the stage one of the members of our first panel is already on the stage, but sir, you will be welcomed back by me very soon. And as you've probably seen from the program, we are going to have two panels. First of all, we're going to look at the geopolitical consequences of the cost of inaction, and I'll introduce our distinguished speakers when we get to that moment very, very soon. And then please stay after 5 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, for the second high-level panel, where we will be looking more at the financial, economic, geoeconomic consequences, but with a panel which is just as expert and just as distinguished, and we'll go to about 6 o'clock doing that. Let me just add that the support for Ukraine Initiative is part of the Friends of Europe initiative for a renewed social contract, where we presented 10 policy choices last February. That document is also available to anybody who would wish to access it as well. We have a pillar on strengthening European defence and resilience. We also conducted a survey of 2024, corresponding to this year, 2024, European citizens as part of our Debating Europe initiative, just to sort of get a sense of whether public support, sympathy, solidarity with Ukraine is holding up over 2 years into the war, or to what extent Ukraine fatigue is now a reality. The good news is that we had 4 major findings. That our people we questioned said that NATO and EU membership, for them at least, gave them a sense of security and comfort in these uncertain times. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is experienced unanimously by everybody as a shock, which brings the reality and possibility of conflict closer to home. There is still very strong support for assistance to Ukraine, and for helping Ukraine to recover its full territory. There is, yes, Ukraine fatigue and an awareness of social economic challenges at home, but so far at least, support is holding up. And of course, the reality of social media reporting brings the war very close to everybody. Before I turn to Paul Ames, finally, I want to welcome the 30 Ukraine veterans who are visiting Brussels and who are joining us today. We salute you. We salute your bravery, your courage, everything you're doing. You carry risks that we don't. Dear veterans, I think that gives you a sense of the mood of the room. Thank you for defending your country and for defending us, all of us, as well. And I do want to mention that this event is being live streamed in Washington, D.C. by our partner, Razom for Ukraine. And the screening has been introduced by the ambassador of Belgium, the Kingdom of the Belgians, to the United States, Ambassador Regibaud. So, Ambassador, if you can hear me, thank you very much for doing that. And if any of you do need interpretation into Ukrainian, which I certainly do, that's available, but you're going to need one of these gadgets. So please, if you need those at the back of the room. So I've said quite a lot. In fact, I've said far too much. It's time to get on with the substance. So Paul Ames, I hope you're going to magically now pop up on my screen, the author of the report. Paul, I'm giving you 8 minutes, no more, because we're under time pressure, to please give us your main findings. What is, Paul, the cost of inaction, of belated and inadequate Western support for Ukraine? Do we have Paul?
You do now, yeah. I've just this second managed to log in.
There you go. Thank God. You've spared me an embarrassing moment.
Okay.
So, the audience is there, Paul, so...
But unfortunately, okay, I did not hear your question, Jamie. So
Paul, present your study, but answer the question of what is the cost of inadequate support for Ukraine?
Well, I think that, with the cost of inadequate support for Ukraine is something we're seeing every day and every moment. I mean, we're seeing it in Kharkiv, and we're seeing it in Donetsk, and we're seeing it everywhere. That's the most visible and clearly and most tragic cost of inaction. But as you know, in the report, we try to look beyond those kind of immediate and tragic events and costs, and look at the broader possible costs of how Western action is affecting the situation across the. Are you hearing me?
Yes, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead. Paul, we're hearing you, and we're seeing you, so please continue.
Okay, so I'm getting a bit of an echo, and excellent. No, so is to try to look at the wider issues, both on the security side, but also on the economic side. So we're looking at how inaction could possibly impact beyond Ukraine itself, how it could impact on actual NATO members, both in terms of the direct military threat that Russia could eventually pose if it's allowed to make progress and to become even more emboldened, but also on issues like the hybrid effect on Europe and on eventually North America across the alliance, and looking also at the wider geopolitical questions, how this impacts on issues like the rule of law globally, the international order, how China and Taiwan might play into this, and how China is watching what's happening in Ukraine and possibly factoring in issues there for its own future plans. And then we also looked at how the cost of inaction, in the sense that right now, with what looks, I guess, to many people, ordinary citizens, taxpayers, billions that's being invested in Ukraine, not enough, but still billions, and that looks like an awful lot of money. But the way we looked at it, and looking at the study, that the West will have to invest a lot more if it allows Russia to make advances and to succeed in Ukraine, because the cost involved in bolstering Western defenses otherwise is going to be astronomical and much more than the cost of giving Ukraine what it needs to succeed and prevail and to win the war. And then we, like I said, beyond the security side of it, we also looked at the economics, and there we also tried to find beyond the question of the infrastructure damage which is being done in Ukraine, the bombing, the terrible destruction, like we've just seen with the publishing house, for example, in Kharkiv, but also the economic and energy infrastructure that's being hit. Beyond that physical damage, there's a question of lost opportunities. Ukraine is a country with enormous potential in agriculture, potential in energy, potential in technology that we're seeing the advances that Ukraine's making in technology every single day. And it's a partner that could be a vital member of the Western Alliance, a vital member of the Euro-Atlantic community. And we're missing that opportunity if we don't give Ukraine the support it needs, not only to prevail in the war, but also to win the subsequent peace and to develop recover its economy, rebuild its economy, and develop as a full-fledged member of the Euro-Atlantic family. So that's basically what I try to do in that report, using online research and also as many interviews as I could fit in. As you know, I'm a long way from Ukraine normally, and but I think we tried to present it in a way that we had as full a picture as possible of the latest information regarding both the security situation and the economic situation as we found it when the report was being prepared.
Thanks, Paul. Paul, thank you very much for that introduction. The report is is quite dense, and what Paul didn't have the time to give you, of course, is all of the statistics, the facts, the figures from the research that he undertook, the comments of many experts that he interviewed, the graphs, and so on. So thank you, Paul. I do commend you, therefore, to take your copy and to absorb that at leisure. It's a contrast between what we stand to lose and what we stand to gain, and the balance of those two factors. Paul, please stay with us, but now may I ask our expert panel, please, to come up to the stage and please to give us their take on all of this. I'm delighted to welcome the Minister of Defence of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Kajsa Ollongren, who's just arrived. Madam Minister, thank you so much. Already had a chance to speak and welcome Hannu Pevkur, the Minister of Defence of Estonia. We should have Alexander Scherba, the Ambassador at Large in the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, joining us remotely, so I hope that's going to work. Also, Alexandra Mavichuk, the head of the Center for Civil Liberties and a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Also, by the way, a 2023 European Young Leader. Alexandra should also be joining us jointly. And finally, we have, I know he's here, we have Jonas Oman, the head of the NGO Blue and Yellow. Again, many thanks indeed for your time. Dear ministers, dear panelists, we're under a lot of time pressure today, so I'm not going to ask you to give lengthy speeches. You may be relieved to hear me say this, but if we could just get our conversation underway, and beginning with you, Minister Ollongren, the Netherlands has provided a lot of money, 7.5 billion euros, if our figures are correct, in support for Ukraine. And of course, as one of the founders of the F-16 consortium, which I understand the Belgian Prime Minister in Kiev today is also going to donate Belgian F-16. So certainly this has got a lot of traction. But from a Dutch perspective, why are you making this big effort? Why do you think it's essential for Ukraine? But what does it mean for the Netherlands, security of the Netherlands, for NATO, for our common security in Europe? Madam Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for that question. But I'm afraid I could talk about that for a very long time. And
but I know you could do it expertly in 3 minutes as well, Minister.
Yes, well, very, very, very briefly. I think, like many other European countries, and especially, of course, the Baltics and countries closer to the war in Ukraine and to Russia, we feel very strongly about the principle of territorial integrity. We feel very strongly that we have to respond to aggressors and that we have to stand up for the values that we believe in Europe, which are about democracy and rule of law. So it is more than solidarity with the Ukrainian people, which of course also drives our efforts. And maybe it's also because we know that the Netherlands is a country that could never defend itself without the support of its partners and allies, both in the European Union and in NATO. And Ukraine has the position that it is, a member of the European family, but not yet a member of the European Union. It feels close to NATO, but it's not a member of NATO. So it doesn't have that position. That automatically others come to its support, to its defense. So it depends on us. And I think also as a mid-sized country in Europe, we often are in the position to connect other countries to take a step forward, either by financial contributions or by capability contributions, and therefore enabling others to join in these efforts. And I think what people are seeing now, after more than 2 years large-scale war and more of 10 years war in Ukraine, we see now that this has changed the security environment for Europe, not just for now, not just for these years and during this war in Ukraine. It has changed our security environment for decades to come. It has made us aware of that we are not safe, that freedom and that liberty and safety has a price, that we must be willing to pay that price, and that we should try to mend certain things that we already knew were there, for instance, the fragmentation of our capabilities, the fact that we don't really know how to act as European countries if America is not there for us to help. And we have to do that now. So while we're working to help Ukraine, we're also really working to help ourselves to get stronger, to make the deterrence deter Russia, and also to make sure that it's not only for now, but for decades to come. Thank you.
Minister, thanks for that very clear statement. We'll come back to many of these things in our Q&A session in just a moment, but also thank you for setting a good standard for your fellow speakers by saying a lot briefly. Minister Pevkur, in Estonia, you've spent an impressive percentage of your GDP consistently on assistance for Ukraine, and one of the first countries to supply substantial amounts of weapons. But how do you feel that you can sort of get your other allies and European partners to sort of follow that kind of example with the same degree of support and conviction? And are you worried that maybe that support is not enough or is going down? What sort of message do you relay when you're in your NATO and EU meetings? And again, thanks also for coming along today. We're really delighted to have you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and of course all those heroes who are here, showing actually what the war means. But coming to your question, so at the end of the day, we have to decide in the West, do we want Ukraine to win this war or not? Because when we just keep feeding Ukraine with minimum necessary help, then of course the victory will not be home. And for us, it is important that Ukraine will not only win this war, but also Russia will lose this war, because we all understand what is on stake. And you know, when you ask that, why did we send so early so much, and why we have given so much, and what the others can do? Of course, it could be, you know, very easy, or it would be very easy to say that okay, it's good when everyone is doing the same what we are. And I believe that, and it's quite sure that when everybody would have done the same what Estonia and Baltics and Poland have done, then I believe that, and also Netherlands, because you know your contribution is really big, then this war would have been over already a long time ago. There was a clear momentum in the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and the momentum was just stopped because of the inadequate help. And of course, you know, we have to just understand that when we look at the battlefield at the moment, then the Russians have digged in, Russians have multiplied their defense production, defense industry, and it will be more and more difficult now to get the victory home. So this is why, of course, our victory strategy, which says that 0.25% from each country's GDP, would be at least you know, good start for the win, because then when we add to that money additionally Ukraine own contribution, then this could be enough, and this could be already close to 2 times more than Russia is spending at the moment. But one thing I wanted to mark also is that we cannot forget that around 30 countries are only helping Ukraine at the moment. 170 in the world or a bit more are not helping. This is something we tend to forget, that still in European, in United Nations, we have many countries who are supporting Russia. And this is why it is, of course, clear that these 30 plus countries who are actually helping Ukraine, in Ramstein format we have 50 countries, but these 30 plus countries who are actually helping Ukraine, that the GDP of our countries is 27 times greater than Russian. And that shows that, you know, when we really want to bring the victory home for Ukraine, then it's about making decisions. Not only political will is important, but also decisions.
Minister, thanks. That message certainly resonated. Thank you, Minister. Now I'm hoping again that the technology is not going to let us down, and we can go to Alexandra Matvichuk, who has been dealing, as I mentioned, with civil liberties. Hopefully, she is going to appear immediately on the screen. But in the meantime, what I wanted to ask her was how she envisions the role of international law. Is it evolving as a result of the tragic war in Ukraine? What do we need to do, given the obvious issues about protection of civilians in conflict, bringing war criminals effectively to justice, not just indicting them and so on, ring fencing, attacks on civilian targets and critical infrastructure, systematic environmental damage? Is international law up to the job of coping with these challenges? So if you can hear me, Alexandra, I hope you can and appear on the screen. The audience would love to hear from you on that. Let's give it a try. Let's see if it works. No? Ah, there she is. Thank you very much. I always look at the big screen because I like the big picture. Alexandra, you are there. Hopefully you could hear me as well. So please.
Yes, I hear you.
Speak to our audience. And thank you for participating.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I would like to draw attention of the audience of the human perspective of cost of inaction. Now Russia took advantages from that fact that for months military support for Ukraine were blocked in United States Congress, and EU countries have no possibility to replace it. In addition to ongoing battle in the Donbas, Russia started attack in Kharkiv region and intensify actions near border with Sumy region. For us, as for human rights lawyers, it's resulted in numerous requests for help from newly occupied settlement near border. People are abducted, are tortured, killed, and we have no legal instruments how to stop this horror, because they use a terror against civilians in order to save control over the occupied territories. A lot of people left everything which they have and fled before Russian troops occupied these new settlements. A lot, but not all. And now people are in trap. They have no tool how to defend their rights, their freedoms, their property, their lives, and their beloved ones. Occupation means torture, enforced disappearances, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. And this is a result and cost of inaction which people in Ukraine are paying for current moment. But what I want also to emphasize that we have to position question properly. We have to speak about cost of inaction, not just for Ukrainians, but for security in our region in general. Because support to Ukraine is not just act of solidarity and commitment to international law with their principle of inviolability of international borders. It's also investment of security of democratic countries itself. Because if we not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will go further. People who were released from Russian hostage told us how Russians told them that first we will occupy Ukraine, and then together with you, we will conquer the whole world. And forcible mobilization of Ukrainians to Russian army is going on the occupied territories for all these 2 years. So in stop here, I would like to conclude that Russia for decades was proactive. Russia committed some horrible things, presented to international community as fait accompli, and push international community to reckon with it. We have to take initiative. We have to stop name and confuse peace with occupation. We have to find a way how to confiscate 300 billions of frozen Russian assets and to deliver them to Ukraine. We have to create a special tribunal on Russian and hold political leadership and high military command of Russian state accountable. And we have to secure and ensure appropriate level of military support to Ukraine. We are fighting not just for ourselves. We are fighting for freedom and for democracy, which is a benchmark of European civilization.
A very clear message. The frozen assets is an issue which we've just been addressing with an expert group of bankers and lawyers who know about this in a previous session, and you'll probably be very interested in the results of that discussion. So thank you again. Please stay with us because we're going to have the discussion in just a moment. I'd now like to go to Ambassador Sherba, the Ukrainian ambassador at large, also joining us online. This time I'll try to look at the right screen to make things go a bit faster. Ambassador, as you come up, hopefully, I want to ask you about how you see the current sort of situation in terms of the resistance of the Ukrainian army. You know, we're hearing a lot about Ukraine. Ambassador, you're there, welcome. Running short on weapons and ammunition. We're all a bit anxious about the Russian claims of capturing more territory, even if it's not major, but still. We're worried about, you know, the time factor. You know, can Western support mobilize and gear up fast enough to meet your needs? So please give us a sense of how you see the strategic situation on the ground at the moment, and maybe, you know, what your hopes and what your fears are in the present circumstance. And again, Ambassador, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Greetings from Kiev. Can you hear me? Can you?
We can hear you and see you perfectly, Ambassador, so please go ahead.
Very good. Well, first of all, let me thank the participants and the organizers for, you know, keeping Ukraine in your hearts and thoughts. This war, in a large extent, is about two things. It's about spirit and human decency. And Ukraine showed the spirit in the beginning, especially of this war, when the whole world thought we didn't stand a chance. And inspired by Ukraine, the decent countries and people of the world showed a great amount of decency and heartfelt support for what Ukraine was subjected to and what brought the worst memories of World War II and I. In a way, the very fact that we in Ukraine, and I'm greeting you from the very center of Kiev, are alive, is a victory of civilization versus barbarity, and a rule-based world versus a world where a bigger nation can attack a smaller one and carve it up. Ukraine saved the rule-based world. Ukrainian soldier did. More than this, I think in these 2 years, it was Ukrainian soldier who was in the driver's seat of history, and we all countries and people were in the passenger seats trying not to let him down. Now in the third year of this war, it feels like things are changing and not in the right direction. We are letting Ukrainian soldiers down. And when I say we, I mean I address first of all the criticism on us Ukrainians, those who aren't on the front line. We all feel like we are not doing enough. And the domestic discourse here in Ukraine is as painful and self-critical as you can imagine. It's about mobilization, about justice and fairness, about our preparedness for even bigger war. The very possibility of negotiations with the country that has killed, raped, tortured, robbed Ukraine for 2 years. We still are in the middle of discussion whether the very negotiation is possible with such a country. And I'm telling you to understand this, we are not pushing blame on you. First of all, we address criticism on ourselves, but unfortunately, the West and the partners of Ukraine carry a part of blame too for the situation where we are right now. Starting with the fact, of course, that at the high point of this war, our biggest and most important ally just took a pause for half a year, just walked away. And the measure of this betrayal is becoming obvious now. We have been bleeding not only ammunition and not only territory, most importantly, our best people. And a very, very bad consequence of this, pause was that our enemy and your enemy, the enemy of freedom, is extremely encouraged right now and knows now for sure that Ukraine's allies can be manipulated, split, and fooled into submission. So, to answer the question that you posed, yes, we are running out of time, and the situation is not good. While Ukraine's allies are still hesitant and filled with self-doubt, the enemies of freedom led by Russia have no scruples, be it escalation, more bloodshed, on even risking nuclear war. They like to talk about it. Yep. Ukraine's hands are bound. We can't strike Russian territory with Western weapons, even if it's 40, 50 kilometers away, where the missile launchers stand and shell Kharkiv from a safe distance. We still don't have the F-16. We still don't have dozen Patriot systems. The whole world cannot come up with a dozen of Patriot systems to cover our skies. We are being told that the combined West, America, EU, Japan, can't produce as many artillery shells as Russia and North Korea. And I have only one question. How is this possible?
Well, we're trying to get some answers to that question, yeah.
And just let me, to wrapping up, I will let you know what a friend of mine writes. To me, he left his comfortable life in Austria to fight first in Kiev Oblast, and now he is in Vuhledar and Donbass. He is an artillery man. He says the artillery hunger is still there. Their monthly ration is very often what used to be their daily ration in the beginning of this war. The shortage of personnel is there. The shortage of money is there. And when I ask my friend what keeps him running, I get one answer. I just want to be a slave to Russia, and I want to kill them all.
Okay, so thanks very much.
It's a war
Thank
between Ukrainians for whom it's live free or die, and Russians who just want to pay their mortgage and to be celebrated as heroes in the process. And the question is, how is this possible? Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador. That was a very frank and direct and very sobering message, but we need to face the facts head on. Finally, Jonas, I'm going to ask Jonas if you could be super brief, and I apologize for that, but I'm also mindful that we have the ministers and an opportunity to ask them a question or two before they have to depart, along with our other guests. Jonas, you are head of the Blue Yellow NGO, and you are directly involved from a citizen's perspective in helping the troops with equipment and weapons at the front. You've just also heard your colleague, the ambassador. So tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and again, what kind of assistance and gaps and vulnerabilities you see.
Blue Yellow is the biggest organization in Europe providing military support on the NGO level. We have provided so far 85 million euros worth of support, all fundraised at this point. If any government want to chip in and help us, Belgium, Estonia, anybody, be my guest. And I'm not kidding, because we are efficient as hell at this point. I'm participating directly in the Kharkiv operations. We are down in Donetsk area, Pokrovsk, etc. We just helped the 25th Brigade to stop several attacks from incident that had 19th Tank Division with our drones. We provide support in there by hundreds of thousands per week to various units, and we are good at it. I have personally been decorated 34 times by various Ukrainians and also from other countries for my personal support to Ukraine. The question is very simple. We are at war. I've been doing this since 2014. I immediately understood that war is coming when I saw these green men in Crimea. I'm Swedish. I have background in some kind of Swedish intelligence. I understand what I'm looking at. And so we're doing what we're doing. I would probably say the easy answer to what we're doing is very, it was actually referred by the ambassador. We are helping to kill as many Russians as possible, because this is what war is about. Yeah, some of you are applauding, some are not, because you're a little shocked, right? I'm going to send these little soldiers' books from Russia and killed Russian soldiers, as long as you can just take a look at their faces. They are young, they are, you know, they had a happy future, but guess what? Putin mobilized and sent them to Ukraine, and we are killing them as many as we can. If we switch the gear here, we're helping Ukraine. No, we are at war together with Ukraine. Let's say if I offer this question to our minister, I mean, you guys are doing a great job, not about that. If you switch your gear, how could we help Ukraine to kill as many Russians as possible? How would you figure such a question?
Well, Jonas, we're going to give the ministers maybe a chance to answer.
Of course. But again, like, this is our sign. It is a torch. It says, "Follow me," and please listen to what I'm saying here. Those from Ukraine, they understand what I'm saying here. We are at war, and we have to act accordingly. For instance, starting buying equipment, military equipment, drones, etc., in Ukraine with the money we are providing to them. Okay, thank you.
No, Jonas, thank you very much. Again, clear messages. Right. We want to take advantage in the short time available, so let's go, as always, at Friends of Europe, hands up, and we'll start with a quick 3 and then carry on. Let me also just remind everybody we have members of the Ukraine Initiative steering group here today. I won't name them all because I'd use up too much time for Q&A, but I'll name them when they stand up to ask a question, but of course, please come in on the debate as well. So first 3, Robert, please, followed by Bill. Robert, as always, tell us who you are. I know, but there will be one person in the audience who doesn't know you.
Hello, Robert Schell. I'm a former police diplomat and NATO official, now at the Center of Eastern Studies for Warsaw, Poland.
And to whom your question is addressed.
And the question is actually particularly to ministers, but I have this few people in the room. We had a big conference in Warsaw on which, you know, one of the main threads was, well, how do you define victory? And that's the question I want to ask. Because in action, I think we're past that point. But I don't think that Minister Pevko or, you know, people from the region would have a difficulty answering it. It's about containing the threat from Russia long term. But I have a feeling that many others would not necessarily agree with that, because it seems that hence, you know, the strategic illiteracy of restricting, you know, the use of weapons, etc. So the question is, how would you define our collective victory, and of course Ukraine?
Perfectly good, clear, well-formulated question. Stop there. Bill Drozdiak, please.
Here.
Bill Drozdiak, Global Fellow at the Wilson International Center in Washington, D.C. To the ministers, I would like to ask, are the European allies prepared to allow the Ukrainian forces to hit Russian targets inside Russia, despite the hesitancy of the Biden administration to do so? And for our Ukrainian friends, the recruitment of new soldiers has been extremely difficult, yet even now with the changes in the mobilization, you have not gone below the age of 25. Many Western forces have soldiers who are from 18 to 25. Why can't you do that?
Okay, thanks again for the snappy question. Anybody else? Members of the steering group? Not yet? No? Good. So who else? Yes, the lady there, please.
Hi.
Our partner, indeed. So thanks. Yeah. Good to see you.
Hi, Lauren Guillaume with Razem for Ukraine. I'm translating this question, not from me. This is coming from a staffer in a Republican office. So what happened, given the upcoming elections in the United States, what happens if the U.S. changes its support in 2025 and moving forward?
Thanks for the direct question. So we'll go to the ministers first. Minister Ollengren, please. You've got how do we define victory? This issue of the permissiveness of hitting Russian targets with Western-supplied weapons. We'll leave the conscription question for our Ukrainian colleagues, but then, of course, how you see U.S. support evolving. And obviously, we'll ask Minister Pevkur to comment on the same issues as well. But Minister, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, how to define victory? First of all, of course, it's really up to Ukraine. So Ukraine defines victory. And we support victory, Ukraine in reaching that victory. But I would say it's very important because if Ukraine were to lose, it has far-reaching consequences for Ukraine, but not only for Ukraine, also for Europe as the European Union, as a region, and for NATO, because what would it mean if the mightiest economic bloc and also military bloc of the world would let this happen? I think we have to think about that consequence also. It means that it opens the path for Putin, but also others in other parts of the world, to say might does make right. And that is something that we simply cannot accept. So we have to find ways to achieve that victory. If the question on the targets inside Russia for me is an easy question. I know there are different opinions in different countries. But as far as the Netherlands is concerned, it is simple. You are fighting an aggressor. You have the right to self-defense. It says so in the UN Charter. So if there are military goals that you have to take out and they are on the other side of the border, not in the annexed areas, but actually in Russia, that is part of your self-defense. Your question was, do we have a European opinion on this? Not really, because it is something that countries can decide on their own. But I am urging, and with me many others, like the French and the Brits, to consider this, because as long as there are countries who are limiting the use of especially long-range missiles and weapons, Ukraine is fighting with one hand on their back. And the last question is the most difficult one, of course, because we know now that the delays in the decision-making in the United States, a delay of several months in the new package, it has cost lives. It has made Ukraine lose the momentum in the war. And the same goes, of course, in our delays and our gaps in our production capacity in Europe. So it matters. It really matters if the United States is in or out. And it's not easy to replace that. They are the biggest biggest country in the world. Very, very powerful. They have a large industry. I mean, for us in NATO, if the US were to leave NATO, I'm only thinking in theory, we would have to double our budgets, but we would also have to double our efforts in industrial production. And we really have to speed that up, because there is a risk. But I think we have to invest everything in keeping that alliance and keeping that engagement of the United States, whatever happens after the elections.
Minister, thanks very much. And on the same questions, the view from Estonia, Minister Pevkur.
Yes, I try to be brief, but it's difficult. The questions are very, long answered questions. Anyway, the victory. Well, for the victory, we have to define what is the loss for Russia, and this is exactly what what is important, that Russia has to lose this war, not only that Ukraine wins the war, because when it doesn't happen, then the message to all dictators in the world will be the same, that just go to your neighbor, take the territory, and that's okay. And the international community will accept this. But we are not accepting this. So but that means that at the end of the day, Russia has to be in the position where somehow, I don't know why, I don't know yet how, but he has to accept the international law, which he is not accepting at the moment. So this is clear, but I'm defining that through that Russia has to lose, and also of course it's up to the Ukrainians to say that, because we cannot, not in this room or anywhere, we cannot say that is this okay to have a stalemate on that front line where it is at the moment? Is it 2014? Is it 1991? So this is not for us to say, but because when somebody will tell from outside that, hey, come on, let's talk now, then what do you say to these people who are sitting here as heroes, who lost their friends, who lost their family members, and for what they were fighting for then? So this is why it is extremely important. But at the end of the day, as I said, Russia has to lose. Then it was the question about the young soldiers and the under 25. Well, it's of course the decision of Ukrainian government, and and parliament, but I truly understand why they have done so. It's just to preserve also the young men and then the future generations. And we see how difficult it was to pass the law of mobilization. So now it is brought down to 25, but in one moment when there is a need and when there is a clear message also from us, from the West, collectively, that we will give everything to Ukraine, then probably they need to have more, because just to take the numbers, when the war started, then Russia had around 270,000 combatants in Ukraine. Today they have 500,000. And even considering that Russia has lost 500,000 as killed or wounded. So there is no question why, but it's rather a pragmatical view. What do you want to have for the future, and do you want to preserve also young men to build up the country? And the last, US, well, for me, this is not so important question, to be honest, because here in this room, we are not selecting or electing a US president. And this is for the US citizens to decide, and for Europeans, it's important to have good relations with both administrations. And what we have to do is that, yes, we have to be in very good contact with also with Republicans, and then we have to, and I know, being there, I believe Kaisa also has been there, and speaking to senators and congressmen and congresswomen, they all, or most of them, most of the Republicans support strongly Ukraine, even stronger than Democrats, in a way. And this leads me to the conclusion that it is for us to speak to Trump administration and to explain and then to say what I truly believe, that Europe needs US the same as US needs Europe, and so simple it is. And then of course US needs also Ukraine.
Mr. Thanks, we're almost out of time, but couldn't we go quickly back to Kiev and ask Ambassador Sherba from a Ukrainian perspective also perhaps to say just a couple of words on the conscription issue? You addressed it very well, Minister. But
I will just, I forgot one more thing. I just found it in this book, in this beautiful book. So,
don't tell me you found something that's wrong.
Yes, that's also something I found. There is, because our GDP, our defense spending is not 2.7 last year, it was already 3, but nevertheless, this is a small mistake. But there is on page 37, why Russia has to lose the war. So there is a picture, and this picture says that границы России нигде не заканчиваются, which means that Russia's borders do not end anywhere. So this is the mentality, and this is the understanding of Putin. And in one closed or small circle, Putin once said that, Russia is like an ocean. The wave comes and the wave goes. And this is exactly how he sees the world. That it's okay, that the borders are changing, but unfortunately, we are standing on the shore in the Baltics. So this is the case, and then also Ukraine. So
Minister, thanks. I hope the insights into Russian foreign policy compensated for getting the statistic wrong, but thank you. And I really admire you on your speed reading, if you could have gone through 50 pages and found that already. We're almost out of time, so Ambassador Sherba, please. We wanted a Ukrainian perspective on the manpower mobilization issue, but I have to ask you to do it in a minute, if you possibly could, and then we will be able to let our distinguished guests depart and change the panel to the economics. Ambassador, please.
Well, there are two ways to fight in this war. First, to volunteer, and second, to be conscripted. The volunteers are already fighting. Now it's time to get the people who are waiting for, for the summons in their post box. And there will be people, of course, who won't have it in them to go fighting, but a lot of people, I think it's dozens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians like myself, who would go once we get summoned. And when was it? 2 weeks ago, there was this new app introduced in Ukraine, Reserve Plus, where people like myself, men of eligible age, were encouraged to register themselves and let the government know where they are and how they are to be reached. And hundreds of thousands of people, men, did that. So the spirit is still there. It's about the organization and about the ability of the government to actually channel it the right way. I think it's very, very much doable.
Okay, Ambassador, thank you. Ministers, thank you very much. Minister Ollengren, Minister Pevkur, Alexandra. No, I totally agree. I apologize, Jonas. We're out of time. If you can do it in a sentence or two, fine, but I do have to wrap up.
And I will. Restoration of territorial integrity, first of all. The security vacuum in Europe. I am funding the Ukrainian strikes in Russia as we speak because you don't agree with it for some political reasons that I don't really get. So here we are. Also, of course, if US, for some reason, lessens it, all of it will come on European shoulders. We will have to take the whole burden of the war on us.
Right.
Okay. But we have to clarify that.
Yes.
Though two of us here, we are supporting heavily this.
Yeah, you do. I know.
No. It's not like.
Don't accuse us.
No, I'm not accusing you. I'm not accusing you.
Jonas, you made your point, and the ministers made their point too. And I did, in all fairness, give you the opportunity as a panelist to make that point. But the clock is the clock. The ministers have to go, and we have a second panel. So can I please again thank everybody, including. Including Alexandra, who was, of course, in Kiev. Could I please ask the audience, first of all, to stay, because we've got a top-class second panel looking at the geo-economic financial aspects, as I mentioned. So please don't leave, because we want to carry on immediately to make best use of our time. In the meantime, just to keep you amused, while we have the changement de décor, at least to keep you informed, Alexandra, we've got the video, right, to show? So let's please show the video where we see President Zelensky.
For them, it is a pleasure to burn. We all know who are we dealing with. Russia is run by men who want to make it a norm, burning lives, destroying cities and villages, dividing people and erasing national borders through war. There is no nation that can stop such war alone. Unaided world leaders' engagement is needed. I'm now in Kharkiv, a city in the east of Ukraine, and unfortunately very close to the border on Russia. What does it mean for Kharkiv? A third year of constant terror. More than 1 million of people in this city. And every night and every day, Russian army is shelling the city, mostly with S-300 missiles. These are air defense missiles which Russia employs to terrorize the land. There is not a single district or street in the Kharkiv that hasn't suffered from this regular cruelty. Russia added strikes with guided aerial bombs. Russian aviation comes close to our state border and launches these bombs straight on the city. It is a weapon of indiscriminate destruction. And anyone in any city of the world, from Sao Paulo to Harbin, take this the same way as terror. Just like all other Russian strikes on hundreds of other of our cities and villages. Some of them, once booming with life, are now burnt to ashes, people-less, a burnt-out emptiness, the most horrible consequence of war. War that we didn't want in Ukraine, that we haven't provoked, and in which Ukraine is defending itself from Russian attempts to seize our resources and territories and destroy our national identity.
situation on the ground. Sorry, I've got an echo on my voice, please, if you could deal with that. Thank you. Right, on to the second panel. I will introduce the panelists after our keynote speaker, because our keynote speaker has very kindly agreed in a very, very busy day to give us time by introducing some introductory remarks. The second session is therefore looking at some of the geo-economic implications of not allowing Ukraine to lose this particular struggle. I'm delighted to welcome Kadri Simpson, European Commissioner for Energy. She has to leave, I know, at about 5:15, but hopefully we still, Commissioner, have given enough time for you to say what you want to say. I think from our point of view, we'd be really delighted how you see, notwithstanding the war, Ukraine's potential as an energy producer and energy supplier, what you and, of course, the Commission, the EU, is doing to help Ukraine from an energy point of view to get through this particular conflict, and looking to the more distant future, you know, the green agenda, lowering energy costs, energy security in the EU. What would be the significance of Ukraine in that equation? But again, a million thanks for coming today. Thanks for your patience, and the floor is yours, Commissioner.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here, and indeed, due to the previous commitments, I have to leave and can't stay until the end of the panel. But despite of that, I'm very grateful for the Friends of Europe for organizing today's event, and I read with interest your study on the cost of inaction in Ukraine, and thank you for putting together such thorough and insightful analysis. And the chapter on energy underlines why building a strong EU-Ukraine energy partnership is so important. I myself, I had the chance to visit Kiev a couple of weeks ago in the situation where Russia still almost every night targeted civilian infrastructure, among the other targets also energy infrastructure. And I saw the devastation. But as you know, over the past few years, EU has been working towards engaging more in Ukraine, and Ukraine is already our key partner in the energy sector. Well, it used to be due to the fact that for many decades, Ukraine was a gas transit country, and even this winter, our companies used Ukraine vast gas storage. This provided us additional security. But we strongly believe that Ukraine can become an even bigger strategic player in the EU's energy landscape, because this is possible both in terms of our energy security, but we are aligned also in green transition. And what sure is that the war didn't change it, quite the opposite. Since the war began, we have taken a number of steps to consolidate our ever closer energy partnership. And there are three key moments in particular that stand out because they point clearly to the direction the EU and Ukraine are headed in on energy. First, only a couple of weeks after Russian tanks crossed the Ukraine border, we synchronized the Ukraine-Moldova grid with the continental European network. And in the very first days, it was a symbolic moment because it kept Ukraine's electricity system stable. It also meant that our system operators didn't wait the outcome of the war, but they acted immediately. And that meant that Ukraine is now interconnected with over 400 million consumers in 24 countries. And what was initially only emergency synchronization is now a permanent one, thanks to Ukrainian transmission system operator, Ukrenergo, completing all the technical requirements. And since then, we have gradually increased electricity imports and export capacity to and from Ukraine, and we are constantly working to ramp up these capacities further. And And that means that at this very moment, when Russia has destroyed almost half of the power generation capacity in Ukraine, more than 8 gigawatts, our producers can compensate some of it. The second key moment was the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding on Renewable Gases between Ukraine and the EU. And that took place last year. And this was a signal of strong political interest and readiness to work together on biogas, biomethane, but also on hydrogen. And there are clear opportunities for both sides. As a natural gas transit country with ambitious plans to decarbonize, Ukraine can exploit its infrastructure to send homegrown renewable gases to the EU. So one day when there is no Russian pipeline gas transiting Ukraine, we still can use the existing infrastructure. And not only does this position Ukraine as a green energy hub at regional level, but it would also help strengthen, of course, Europe's energy resilience. And from an energy security angle, the focus on renewable gases also makes sense, because in time of wars, dispersed energy sources like renewable electricity and renewable gases are more resilient to shelling. And the third moment was, of course, the historic decision to open EU accession negotiations with Ukraine. And the message is clear: Ukraine belongs to the EU. And despite the huge hardship of the ongoing war, Ukraine has continued to pursue reforms to this end. From my field of responsibility, I also do believe that Ukrainian energy market will be an equal member of our common market, single market. And right now already, Ukraine has shown an impressive capacity to make progress in aligning with EU energy acquis. Ukraine has made excellent progress in setting up electricity and gas market, which will allow its system to become more integrated into our energy market. And it is also rebuilding its economy and its infrastructure in line with Green Deal goals, committing to a number of market reforms, and among them is the adoption of the National Energy and Climate Plan. This is the blueprint for green reconstruction and recovery, and this is an important tool which will contribute to stable and transparent policies, and which are, of course, necessary preconditions for future investments. And Ukraine has already presented its draft, developed under the very same template as all the EU member states do use. And this is just one more example of the great strides made by Ukraine and our ever closer energy cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at the critical juncture for Ukraine war efforts, and Russia tries and continues to try to wreak havoc by targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And I want to assure you that we are committed to help Ukraine to rebuild energy infrastructure. This is not only EU effort, we are coordinating also G7 plus format. And even despite the fact that the thermal power plants are destroyed beyond repair, we do have a plan in place how to transport smaller scale turbines that could help Ukrainians in the bigger cities, despite the fact that cogeneration plants are destroyed as well. So we are delivering equipment and providing assistance for urgent energy needs. And from now until 2027, as you know, the Ukraine facility will also provide stable and sustainable financing to Ukraine to the tune of 50 billion euros. And this is the biggest package ever to third country to date. And fundamentally, we will do everything we can to ensure that Ukraine wins this war, because this is the only message we can echo. And this was exactly the message I delivered also to my counterpart when I visited Energy Minister German Galushenko in Kiev. And as your study rightly says, allowing Russia to prevail would be disastrous for the environment and constitute a major threat to European energy security and supply. So we cannot and we will not let that happen. Thank you.
Commissioner, thanks very much. I mean, obviously, Russia has deliberately targeted Ukraine's energy grid to make life miserable for the population consistently. But it's very good to know that you're on the case with the Commission in terms of doing your utmost to help them keep the lights on. So many thanks for giving us the comprehensive overview. Two things to say as I say goodbye to you. The first thing is that as a keynote speaker, you don't have to answer questions. The second thing is we've kept our promise. We promised you that you would be on your way at 5:15 for your next engagement. Promesse tenue, which is not always the case at Friends of Europe when it comes to timekeeping, as you know. Commissioner, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming today. Thank you. Right, to the panel, and as I said, we've really got a top flight panel. So Gert-Jan Koopman, who is a familiar friend at Friends of Europe. Thank you, as always, Gert-Jan, for your loyalty to us, because you come and speak at a number of our events. You're, of course, I don't have to say this, but I'm going to say it, you're Director General of European Neighbourhood Enlargement Negotiations. So to the, well, it's not really a stage, but come up here, please. And then we've got Matteo Patroni, the Vice President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, who should be online, si tout va bien. We know that we've got the Governor of the National Bank of Ukraine, Andrei Pishny, because Mr. Governor, you've already participated in all of the events up to now, so I know you're here, so please come and take the stage as well. Delighted also to welcome in the front row Petra Gombalova, also a good friend of Friends of Europe, who, as everybody knows, heads up the Ukraine division, as well as in the section dealing with Eastern Europe and Central Asia in the European External Action Service. And finally, we have Jean, let me get it right, Jean. It's going from one language to the other. Jean Van Wetter, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Enabel, or Annabelle, Jean, you'll give me the correct pronunciation of that, the Belgian Development Agency. Jean, merci beaucoup, thank you very much. So as I mentioned, really a great panel now with hopefully a little bit more time for questions and answers to look at the geoeconomic consequences. So Gert-Jan, to you first. Clearly, given your portfolio, our eyes are on the beginning of the accession negotiations with Ukraine. We're expecting the negotiation framework to be adopted soon. And every time you come, we ask you, how do you see it all going? What are going to be the big challenges? We've had, of course, the imbroglio over agricultural imports and farmers protesting at borders. Hopefully that has died down a little bit, but it's already sort of established the common agricultural policy as a big issue. And again, is it a question of a lot of short-term costs but long-term benefits? But anyway, you're responsible for the process, so how are you taking it forward, dear sir? And welcome again.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and good afternoon to everyone here. It's always a pleasure to be with Friends of Europe, and I want to congratulate you, first of all, if I may, on this book, which I think is extremely timely, very important, and provides the right long-term strategic setting for this debate. Now, to your question, Ukraine is very different from other countries in the accession process for all the reasons that you've been discussing earlier this afternoon. But it's also similar in some respects. And what I want to say is that actually there is no discount on the reforms that are needed for accession. So that actually is hard. Accession is hard for candidate countries, especially if they are fighting, literally fighting for their lives. But the good news here is that since Ukraine became a candidate country, it actually has introduced reforms in a way that very few other accession candidates have. So sometimes the prospect of failure in the process really is extremely motivational. And I think Ukraine has done an admirable job in undertaking the necessary reforms to get it to the point where we believe the Council should indeed adopt the negotiating framework. Why am I saying all of this? Because ultimately, the accession process stands or fails with the reforms that are needed to align with the acquis. At the end of the day, it's as simple as that. So how hard is it going to be for Ukraine? Well, it's going to be hard, but the outlook is good because the motivation is strong and the track record is also strong. I think your question is more about us. How are we going to deal with it? And where are there going to be very big problems? And here I want to sound more optimistic than many of the commentators. I actually think that if you compare this enlargement, and I'm not just looking at Ukraine, but I'm looking at Ukraine, Moldova, some of the Western Balkan partners as well. If you add all of these countries up in terms of size of GDP, size of the population, and you compare a theoretical, a potential large enlargement with all these countries to what happened in 2004, it's actually relatively small, much smaller, about half. So let us keep that in mind. We managed then with countries that shared some features of the Ukrainian economy. So I don't really see why doing half of what we succeeded back in 2004 very successfully, why that is impossible. Secondly, I think what people tend to forget is that the process takes a bit of time. They're not going to be a member state tomorrow. And the country is modernizing. We have the Ukraine facility, the commissioner just referred to it, which is intended to drive forward growth. And actually, one of the fastest growing economies in Europe last year was Ukraine.
Despite the war.
Despite the war. So, of course, having crashed the year before, bouncing back is a little bit easier. But, both the IMF and our own scenarios suggest that if the reforms needed for enlargement and also needed for getting the money under the Ukraine plan, the 50 billion that was referred to, if they succeed, and they should succeed, then actually that will be a huge growth impetus. So we're going to be looking at a country that is richer, that is modernized, that has put its house in order when it comes to things like rule of law by the time accession happens. And I think this point about the dynamic nature of the process is fundamental. A lot of people make the mistake of saying, what would it look like if Ukraine joined tomorrow? And then it would be many problems. The final point is this. If you look at the challenges for the existing member states, there are broadly three. One is money, the second is policies, including agriculture, and the third is essentially our own decision-making process. I would argue that the first two are actually manageable. On policies, you mentioned the cap. Well, I cannot imagine an enlargement, so an accession treaty, that would replicate the autonomous trade measures that we have granted to Ukraine, which essentially bring them fully into the internal market without any fundamental harmonization. That is not the way enlargement works. So, there will be transition periods, and there will be a much higher degree of alignment with the basic rules of the EU. So that will all be a lot easier. I don't think the policies as such are going to be too problematic. I think when you look at the budget, yes, it's a big country, but as I said, we've done much bigger enlargements. This country needs reconstruction support, but a lot of this will be private sector support. So a lot of this will be done through a modern generation of financial instruments. So also that, I don't think, is an insurmountable obstacle, which leaves the decision-making process in the Union. And there's a lot of concern that, as we have more member states, the decision-making rules become very complex. And also here, I would say, yes, that is true. But compare the EU 27 to the US. Look at the time it took us to get our Ukraine facility up and running, despite all of the difficulties, which were well advertised, and compare that with the US, which basically doesn't require unanimity. I think we should draw some encouragement from that. Thank you.
Okay, Jan, thanks very much for that very comprehensive, very quick overview. But also sort of striking a note of sort of confidence. Wir schaffen es, as a German Chancellor once said. Thank you. I understand that Matteo Patroni at the EBRD isn't yet connected. If that's the case, I don't see him on the screen. Let's continue and go to the Governor of the National Bank of Ukraine, Andrei Pishny. And I'd like to ask you, sir, if you could talk. Thank you. If you could talk a little bit about what the National Bank of Ukraine is currently doing to stabilize Ukraine's economy, what kind of help you need from Europe, the EU, Europe more general, in terms of economic stabilization, and how much now of the resources are you able to generate internally? Gert-Jan spoke of the fact that, despite the war, you're still managing to get economic growth and economic progress. What action is the bank taking to keep that growth rate going? I understand that the governor likes to speak in Ukrainian, so please, headsets for those of you like me who don't follow Ukrainian. Governor, delighted to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Слово. In fact, good afternoon. It's nice to be here today. I have the feeling that it's a day of Ukraine in Brussels today. The president of Ukraine is meeting the prime minister and signing the respective very important security agreements, treaties. We are discussing a very important, not a simple one, but vital agenda for Ukraine. You posed good questions, how we managed to withstand and why the National Bank and the government were successful in resolution of economic problems. I have a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is here in this room. These are our military guys. Thanks to them, to their efforts of our warriors, the National Bank can be successful because they still hold the skies. Thank you. And there is a long answer, which is more complicated. Some time ago, the National Bank, at the end of 2022, asked the same question to itself: how much resources we have and how much we need in order to balance macroeconomic crisis in which Ukraine found itself due to the war. In one day, we lost 1/3 of the GDP and 20% of our territory. Europe hasn't seen a big immigration flow. 16 million Ukrainians left their homes. 7 million Ukrainians are still abroad. So, indeed, we had a critically scarce resource. That's why we contacted our international partners. We organized a monitoring program with involvement of the board of directors of the International Monetary Fund that identified Ukraine's capacity to resist. Is the translation available? The gap that was still uncovered due to crisis in Ukraine, thanks to organization of the respective platform, the IMF covered through assurances provided by partner countries. These were G7 countries. The overall package of financial support on the horizon of 4 years is 120 billion, subject to one condition. Despite the war, Ukraine had to ensure probably the most ambitious plan of reform that has ever been seen in Europe. We have no discount for reforms. Despite the war, despite the challenges that arise every day, and thanks to the army, the armed forces, and international support, we reformed the country. I arrived here from Warsaw. In Warsaw, we are now having the mission of the International Monetary Fund. This is the 4th review of the program of extended fund facility. The 4th review. We have never been that far. And we are very optimistic in terms of positive outcome and result of this fourth review. And working in Warsaw, we are preparing the foundation for the fifth review that will take place in September, that will, together with finance, bring new structural reforms and changes to Ukraine. What do we need? We need what is promised to us. We need the assurances that Ukraine received. We need the full package of financial support, regular and sufficient in its amount. We need to receive money when we need it. In 2023, despite the war, thanks to governance and sustainable international support, we managed to avoid monetary finance of the budget. Monetary finance of 2022 resulted in 30% inflation for Ukraine. We managed to cope with it. Over the year, we tamed inflation down to 5% and ensured economic growth. We created the basis that enables Ukraine to build its capacity thanks to the armed forces and international financial support to reform the country and to enhance our capacity to resist and to win. But the truth is that Russia continues to attack us, and Russians used this pause in provision of regular and sufficient financial and military support. And this pause today is felt in Kharkiv, where there is an attack on the city, where new troops are being formed to attack the country. Destructions of international infrastructure that creates additional financial needs for the country. Therefore, I can assure you that Ukrainians respect, appreciate, and are very grateful for all the support you provide. We appreciate each cent, each zloty, each euro you provide us. But the war is going on, and we have to rely on longer processes, and they should be provided with required resources. I'm frequently asked what will happen if Ukraine lacks resources. Will it be able to withstand? I have the answer to this question.
The other speakers. So you'll have a chance to come back in.
Oh, just one sentence. Okay, one sentence. I will leave the question, how long will Europe be able to stand without Ukraine?
Governor, thank you. But as I mentioned, there'll be questions to you, and you can make further points then. But Petra Gombolova, you have this sort of big strategic view, of course, of the EU support for Ukraine. And apart from what Jan was describing, which is the specific enlargement process and procedures, you know, how do you see the way ahead? I mean, for somebody like me, it's often quite interesting to see the articulation between what the EU as an institution is doing, you know, European Peace Facility, the training and so on, the institutions, the European Defence Agency, and what's going on in all these sort of bilateral initiatives of groups of EU countries working together on a specific capability. And how is it going in terms of increasing the EU resilience and defence in the wake of the war, while at the same time generating the resources to actually help Ukraine too? I mean, to what degree can Europe do both? You know, make itself stronger, but keep Ukraine stable and free as well. Anyway, thanks for coming. Good to see you.
Yes. Thanks a lot for this million-dollar question.
Gave it a try.
Not easy. Thank you very much. So I would just start probably, and I'm sure you discussed today, but the context is very clear. After President Putin won the election, he's there for long haul, for the war of attrition, and this means that we have to really continue our policy of supporting to Ukraine, to isolate Russia, to impose severe sanctions, to decrease or dismantle Russia's war economy. But also, as you said, it's very clear that we also need to work on our resilience. I would start probably with short-term support and long-term support. So I'm sure you heard it again today, and I think the governor was very clear. The war is waging, and we see our Ukrainian soldiers here, which are an important testament, and also wake-up call, everyday wake-up call for us that we have to stop. We can't listen to this defeatist narrative sometimes out there, but we really need to continue. And the fact that we see what's happening, the dramatic situation on the battlefield is only needs to, or should only increase and strengthen our resolve. On the military support, I think it's very clear that, and this is probably a prerequisite for all the things we have been discussing here for the economic development or accession of Ukraine. Ukraine needs air defense, needs ammunition, and it needs, of course, also important training. We are working now on the operationalize the Ukraine assistance funds under the EPF, which is 5 billion euros. But we are also looking on the remaining amounts from last year, which is roughly 2 billion euros. So this is also a good news that we could have additional amount of support. But what is a game changer, and this was last week or this week, the game changer is that we, member states, have agreed on use of the windfall revenues from the immobilized Russian assets for military purposes. And I think this is extremely important because this gives us important liquidity twice a year. So we are now working on how to make it work. And the main guiding principle of our support in this case is immediate Ukrainian needs of the soldiers. We are also working on the training, but as you mentioned, the EU or EU institutions cannot do it alone. And it has to be a collective work and cooperation, coordination with the member states, but also with our partners like the US and G7. And it was very clear, for example, that also what we heard from Ukrainian friends, any gap of our support being military or especially military has a real impact on the battlefield, and unfortunately it costs lives. And I think we have to still remember this very truth that we need to continue and ensure the flows. And I think that for us, the fact that we will have the windfall revenues is one of the good news. We see also the Germany working on air defense coalition. We see Czech Republic working on ammunition. So this is very clear that we need to do it together. We need to do more and faster. And final point, more on the longer term, we also are aware that, unfortunately, it looks like now the war will not end tomorrow. So we are working on the long-term security commitment assurances for Ukraine to help Ukraine to deter the future aggression, to help it, increase the resilience. And we basically want to provide Ukraine with an important package of different strands of the cooperation. So the security commitments will have roughly three main areas. It will be military support. It will be the increase in resilience, including fight against manipulation of disinformation, manipulation of information by Russia. It will also contain the financial support, which is very needed. And of course, the ultimate guarantee will be the EU accession. So I will probably stop here.
Petra, thank you. Thanks for presenting a lot very clearly, which I knew you would do, by the way. Jean, we know, we've heard a lot today, Ukraine has enormous development challenges, the short-term humanitarian situation, the longer-term reconstruction. Can you tell us a little bit about what Belgium is doing, your own organization, Annabelle? What do you do by yourselves, or where do you work within the EU or particular partners? It would be good, to give us your sense of how you see the situation developing. And again, my thanks to you for coming today.
Thank you to you, and thank you to Friends of Europe for this very timely debate and also timely study. I think the title is very well found, Cost of Inaction, because the more we wait, the costlier it will be. And today you saw President Zelensky was in Belgium and met with our Prime Minister, and our Prime Minister wanted to speed up the delivery of the F-16 and of course respond on the military front. I'm very moved by the presence today of the soldiers and the veteran. I was actually with our Prime Minister 2 months ago in Hostomel for the ceremony after 2 years of the Russian aggression. And President Zelensky was giving medals to the soldiers. And it was, you could see that on TV and you can see it from here in Europe, but it's only when you are there you realize actually what is the cost of war and the cost of inaction. And our Prime Minister, I'm happy, was actually also moved by this, and he took action. And today we see what this action is looking at. So Belgium is using the taxes on interest rates on Russian frozen assets. A few months ago, we announced 3 billion euro assistance to Ukraine. One part of it is military, including the F-16s and F-16s training. But there is also one part on the reconstruction and the long term. And I like your debate today because both have to be looked simultaneously. Of course, there is the military support, the humanitarian assistance, but we need to think about the EU accession on the long run. And that's what we do at Enable. So we are the Belgian Development Agency, and we look at how we can provide European expertise, Belgian expertise, in working with Ukrainian authorities in reforming to provide support to the population right now, but also looking at medium-term and longer-term accession to the EU. So it's a kind of twin-track approach, looking at immediate needs in the field of energy, for example, winterization, the next winter, how can we prepare for that concretely by providing support in energy supplies, generators, also mini-grids, less dependence on central energy provision. The same for schooling and health facility. We renovate or provide shelters for schools. So that's immediate support. But on the same time, we are looking at reforms to build back better, as we say, for the longer term. So it's really looking short term, medium term, and long term. And that's the added value we can have as an agency. How we coordinate with the EU, obviously, we talk to each other. That's a big challenge, the coordination. Everybody wants to help, which is a good thing, but that's what I saw in Kyiv. For the Ukrainian authorities managing so many different agencies, we need obviously to work with existing systems and to talk to each other. That's what we do on a regular basis. Thank you.
Jean, thanks very much. We don't have Matteo Patroni, but he has asked a colleague, Wolfgang Schläger, if I've got that correct, who, of course, is also with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Wolfgang, I can see you. Could you see me, or at least hear me? Positive sign of the hand. Thank you. I think we need a bit more volume for you, Wolfgang.
Okay, one.
That's better. We can hear.
One, two,
so,
three.
Thanks for stepping in at the last moment for Matteo. Please give him our greetings, but be grateful if in 3 minutes you could just give us your sense of what role the bank can play and the banking financial community more generally in helping Ukraine, short-term, medium-term, long-term, to recover from the war, to improve its economic resilience, and of course to come out of the war, in sort of better economic shape in terms of modernization, fit for the future than maybe it would have been before the war, so that even the darkest clouds can still have a silver lining. So again, many thanks for joining us. We can see you, we can hear you, so floor is yours, please.
Yeah, Jamie, thank you very much. And sorry for technical problems, which our Vice President Matteo Patrone had. So I'm the head of the office of the EBRD in Brussels, and I've been many times at Friends of Europe, and I really like the format you're doing. And so just to give you a couple of points on to respond to your question. The EBRD, as the enlargement bank, has been there from the first moment in the 90s to support Ukraine. And we had, before the war, about 1 billion euros of exposure to the country. And since the war started, we have now doubled that. So we have, since 22, financed more than 4 billion euros in different projects, mainly in the public sector, to support that the energy supply is running, Ukrenergo, Naftogaz, but also the railways. And the other half, we have supported private sector, in particular the pharmaceutical industry, the agribusiness, but also small and medium enterprises. Because that is really important, that the economy still keeps running, that companies are paying their taxes, and we see that not only the military resilience is there, but also from the private sector. And we continue supporting Ukraine. We will, with also other partners from the IFIs, the Commission knows it very well, we are together with the EIB, with World Bank, with the CB and others, we are working really to help that the financing is going into the economy, that things are getting easier also for the private sector, like, for example, working on joint procurement aspects with the Ukrainian government. So it's a lot of practical stuff going on. And now we have to focus on the now, but we're also looking ahead. And we hope that in the future we can, again, double maybe our investments.
Well, thank you very much. Again, thanks for giving us a lot of information succinctly and quickly. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's clear that obviously in this field, economics, integration, financial support, Ukrainian efforts, Western efforts, a lot is going on. Interesting to try to see what more can or should be done. But anyway, it's your turn to ask questions. Again, I apologize that we don't have more time, but we will use the time we have. This time I'm going to go up to the back of the room. As always, gentleman with his hand up there with the specs. If you could give your name and affiliation, and say to which person, if there is a particular person, your question is addressed, sir.
Thank you very much, Radu Aghia, Romania Civil Society. Given the fact that Russia is using corruption and kleptocracy as an instrument, strategic instrument to disrupt West and to destroy our civilization, do you think the current measures against corruption and against kleptocracy are enough in Europe? And if you think, or in Ukraine, what should be better done in order to fight corruption and kleptocracy? Thank you.
Right, so we've got corruption, bureaucracy. Thank you very much. As I said, I'll take three. There's another hand up at the back, please.
Hi, Bart Shepchik at Covington Burling. You mentioned the issue of Russian state assets, and I wanted to ask what the cost of inaction is for failing to seize these Russian state assets and making available to Ukraine something on the order of 200 to 300 billion euro to help continue it, fight the war, and then to provide for reconstruction. And if I may add another question on reconstruction itself, while the conflict is continuing, and we don't know exactly if it will continue for another year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and these things can be actually quite indefinite, what are some creative ideas to start reconstruction now, or at least help think through potential reconstruction projects that could take either in parts of Ukraine, in parts of the EU where Ukrainians are currently being hosted on the theory that Ukraine is where Ukrainians are. And anyway, if you could just share any ideas on that.
Okay, thanks for those questions. I've got time. One more. I'm trying to find people who haven't asked one already, to be perfectly fair, but I will go to people who've asked one already if nobody else comes along. Ambassador Rose Gossamiller, please, in the front. Member of the Ukraine Initiative Steering Group.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you all for very interesting talks today. I actually had a question for you, Ms. Gombolova, because I spent the day today at NATO. I was a former NATO Deputy Secretary General, and my ears perked up when you talked about military activity being one of your three pillars, and also you're thinking about training. These, of course, are issues that NATO is also wrestling with. So how do you think about coordinating with NATO at this moment? When I was DSG, we actually had quite a bit of activity going on, but I've lost track over the last 5 years. So I'd like to hear how you're thinking about this urgent problem today when we're looking at urgent assistance to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. Just to take these in a sort of reverse order. First then, the question on NATO-EU coordination. And then we'll go into corruption and frozen assets and all of these things with the financial people, the economists, afterwards. Over to you, please.
Yes, thanks a lot for the question. The answer is very easy. We closely cooperate with NATO colleagues. We cooperate bilaterally. We have regular meetings on different levels, staff meetings. But also, for example, last week we had our ambassador in Kiev speaking to Permanent Council in NATO. And we coordinate through the different groups, but also within the Rammstein groups. So there we go into the details of different topics, ammunition, air defense, training, to ensure that we cover all the needs of Ukraine. Of course, as it was said, probably the coordination is not perfect, but it is, and I know what you mean. But I would say that in the last 2 years, since the war started, the relations between EU and NATO have strengthened substantially. And our cooperation is closer than ever. You might remember that we have negotiated for several years the EU-NATO joint declaration, but in the end, after the war, it was a matter of I would say even several weeks. So I think that the coordination and cooperation is there, is very good, and as I said, we cannot do it alone. We have to be we are all in together. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Petra. The Governor of the National Bank, could you answer, if you don't mind, please, sir, the question on corruption and bureaucracy, and is this a vulnerability which allows Russia to have more influence over your affairs, if I understood the question correctly, sir? I'm going to ask everybody for brief answers so that we can obviously try to get a couple of more questions in before we close. Governor, please.
I think that in Ukraine, thank you for this question. It is important, in fact, because this topic is always related to Ukraine, is linked to Ukraine. There is a strong feeling that Ukraine started systemic, profound, and sometimes unprecedented corruption fight. Are we successful? Yes, we are. Do we manage to do everything? No. Do we need to do more? Yes. And in fact, the program with the International Monetary Fund, Ukraine Facility Plan, agreed with the European Union, are all about this element. We understand better than others how destructive the corruption is. So for Ukraine, it's the issue number one. And we would like that when we discuss the issue of corruption in Ukraine, we do not forget about the progress of Ukraine on the way to combat corruption. And I want to come back and to thank you for the statement that Ukraine has no discounts in terms of reform plan implementation.
Gert-Jan, this question about, when to start reconstruction. Do you wait for the war to be over, so at least then there's no more fighting, and if you rebuild a building, it doesn't get knocked down? We've heard voices today about getting on with the reconstruction now. So how difficult, what type of reconstruction can you do in wartime? And obviously, how the EU sees this. I'm sure that Wolfgang has a comment on this, and Jean would as well, but you first, sir.
Thank you. Well, I think it is evident that reconstruction has to start immediately for multiple reasons, if only because the economy will not manage, we will not manage to sustain economic development without the basics being in place, even if it is hard. And yes, some of the reconstructed infrastructure has been deconstructed again through Russian aggression. Take the energy sector. Actually, quite significant funds were allocated to this last year already. And as you know, the G7 Plus has set up a donor coordination platform for reconstruction, which I co-chair actually with the Minister of Finance and the US Deputy National Security Advisor. So that work actually is ongoing. Obviously, in peacetime, it's easier to reconstruct than during the war. But efforts are being made, and I think Ukraine is also adapting the way in which it reconstructs to the challenge of continued aggression. So that will also have to continue. Funds are available from last year, and under the Ukraine facility, there is a significant amount available under the so-called second pillar, which is not for budget support, but for investment support. And we just decided 2 weeks ago to allocate 1.5 billion euros, which will lead to about 6 billion euros of investments still this year.
Thanks a lot. Jean, please.
Yeah, I think reconstruction is very important also to attract people to go back. You have internally displaced persons. We work in the region of Cherniv, and there people left. If you want people to come back, you need to have basic infrastructure, and it has to be ready for people. So for this aspect, for the morale is very important, but also for the manpower. And one of the issues in construction is finding the right people and the companies to construct for that. You need to have the people in place, so it's very important. And a last word is innovation. A few days ago, I met a company building kind of glass which is unbreakable. So if you have an explosion, it doesn't break immediately. So we can also innovate in the way we do new construction so that it's kind of resilient to a war zone. But very important for the morale and to reattract people in some regions.
Thanks, Sean. Wolfgang, I don't see you on the screen. I'm sort of hoping you're still with us because, of course, you come from a bank which is called Reconstruction and Development. If you could also give your take on that, and also would you mind commenting on the question of, if you wish to, about unfreezing, confiscation of Russian central bank assets, Russian assets, how you see that going, and how significant that would be in terms of financing the reconstruction of Ukraine. Would it pay for everything? Maybe not, but would it at least pay, if it were doable, for a considerable part of that reconstruction?
Jamie, I'm afraid I cannot answer this last question because we don't really have directly involved in this question. It's, of course, a member states issue. And I understand that some part of this, the recent windfall, which has been taken off from the assets, are being not only for military support, but also going into the Ukraine facility for construction. And then we, as the EBRD, and as well as the other partners, I suppose, can also have access to this fund in order to then leverage some of our investments. But very short on the corruption aspect, I think what's really important to understand that the Ukrainians are not starting just now. I mean, since 2014, we have, for example, with the EU, a program where we have 200 young people and Ukrainians who are working with the different administration in order to also to fight corruption. And so we're not just starting now from scratch. And of course, you can imagine that all the international donors and banks, private sector, have a great interest that all the investments are transparent and being kind of compliant to the rules. And just to give you an example back to the procurement aspect, we're working now with a digital platform for Ukrainians, which they have set up, and it seems quite promising.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We're virtually out of time, but I'm going to be super generous and auction for a considerable price the last question. If anybody would like to put in a bid for it, we can negotiate the price later on. But you know, this is like Sotheby's, the auctioneer, the hammer is going down here. Ma'am, you get it. And because you're so nice, it will be free of charge. But you get the last question.
Thank you. Jamila Castro from the United Nations. I'm wondering, especially the engineer, well, all of you actually working on reconstruction, how much principles of a women, peace and security agenda are being integrated, so the gender perspective, into the reconstruction efforts that are ongoing or that you're planning to put in place?
That's a very good, timely question. As we're almost out of time, and the question could be answered by, I suppose, virtually anybody on the panel, please, those who want to answer it, please do so, the Governor. But could you please do it, sir, in 2 sentences maximum, please? And then we will be right on time to end.
Is it about a gender agenda on reconstruction? In fact, when we talk about reconstruction and recovery, there are certain priorities that are created by the war. And first and foremost, this is power sector. If we talk about principles according to which we will allocate resources, it will be transparency and accountability. For us, it is very important to maintain confidence. Energy issue is the issue of survival for the country because Russia destroyed 80% of power generation capacity and they have to be recovered. And this will be the first priority to allocate resources. Of course, together with other things, starting from residential construction and infrastructure, which was also significantly damaged. You know that the scope of losses, according to estimate of the World Bank, is $500 billion. And this is without the latest damages caused by Russia to the energy infrastructure.
Security agenda. Anybody else would wish to pass a comment? I'm giving you the opportunity, not the obligation. No. Wolfgang, do you want to comment on that, if you're still there from the bank's perspective? Wolfgang, you put yourself on mute.
Check 1, 2.
Hear you now.
No, very quickly, on gender inclusiveness is very much, of course, our priority, and we have programs for SMEs supports which are being managed by women, but also now on war veterans, young people. So this is specifically foreseen in some of our programs, which are partly supported by the EU.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end. Cyril is giving me a note. Yes, I will do that, Cyril, I promise. I can't afford to be fired, at least still too young for that, so I will deliver that message. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Obviously, first and foremost, thank you so much to our fantastic panelists. My two takeaways very briefly from what we've heard in both panels are, first of all, that there is still a tremendous degree of goodwill and international support for Ukraine, and a real sense that their fight is our fight, their loss is our loss. Success will benefit all of us in Europe. So that's encouraging, particularly the ability of Ukraine to make progress itself, even in these most trying of circumstances. So it's good the support's still there. The other sense that I get is that, at least in terms of Ukraine's long-term development, a lot of incredibly good things are happening, and we can keep them happening if we can just get Ukraine through the war. So you know, the long term's in place, but we've got to get the short term under better control so that that is still going to be open. You know, Woody Allen used to say, "I love the future so much, I want to spend as much time in it as possible," and we need to be in a position to spend as much time in Ukraine's future as possible. So it's all about getting through the war. I heard good messages about consistency of funding, that we do have the resources. It's a question of political will, generating that will. I heard a lot about Ukraine not getting a free pass in terms of Euro-Atlantic integration, but good things about Ukraine being able to meet those particular goals, and a lot about developing the right perspective and then sticking to it, which is often lacking in this debate. But the overall message is that I think today we sort of clearly defined what the stakes in all of this really are, and of course that's what this report set out to do. The key question is that once you've identified the stakes, your action has to be consequential to those stakes. And maybe that's where the gap still is. But again, dear panelists, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, just to say that if you don't rush to take your copy, the cost of inaction to you is that you will not have a copy of this excellent report. As I again thank the panelists, I thank Paul Ames. I'd also just like to mention very briefly my colleagues, the PSD team, Alexandra, Nakoma and Cyril, because they did a great deal of the research for Paul Ames in putting all of this together. So you deserve some of the credit too, guys. And thank you very much for all of that. We are going to follow this for media representatives and members of our distinguished steering group with the Dialogue at Dusk, which is a discussion with the media, so no escape for the steering group or for the media. If you, where's that taking place? Is that? It's just upstairs, so we could prevent you going out of the door and steer you to the right room there. But at least for this public opening session, thank you again to everybody. Thank you, dear audience. Thank you for staying until the end, which we really appreciate. And good evening and safe journey home.